to talk a bit about how our mindset around our goals in behavior therapy can affect our emotional cups and therefore the sustainability of our work. So, to lay a foundation for that, let's first talk about what we do in behavior therapy, what progress looks like in behavior therapy, and what sustainability has to do with behavior work. So, behavior therapy might be a term that we use to talk about the type of training that we do with dogs who have behavior concerns. And this is an important distinction because this is where a lot of people get lost in what is a very unregulated industry. They have a dog with a behavior concern, and they connect with a professional who tries to use what we think of as dog training, operant conditioning, to address behavior concerns. And that's not going to work. So I specialize in working with dogs displaying aggressive behavior and dogs with dysregulated nervous systems. Dogs with dysregulated nervous systems are dogs whose baseline stress levels are higher than ideal, and they often struggle with resilience to stress, bouncing back from stress. They have that smaller window of tolerance for stress because their baseline stress levels are already higher. They're already closer to that sympathetic nervous system activation, that fight or flight, and often they struggle with the ability to self-regulate, to engage in behaviors that will help themselves calm down effectively. So when we think about dog training sort of traditionally, and I don't mean in terms of like using punishment, I mean operant conditioning, teaching dogs behaviors, reinforcing behaviors, teaching the dog to sit and stay and walk on a loose leash. For dogs who are not dealing with behavior concerns or are not dealing with dysregulation, which can be two separate things, but there is often a lot of overlap. It's a pretty linear process. The steps typically go as expected, and you move forward. And that's not to say that there's not troubleshooting or that sort of thing, but I certainly find my clients who come from a strong operant background, maybe they've done a lot of like sports work with their dog, or they have a lot of experience with service dogs, or they've had a lot of dogs in their life and have always enjoyed, taking classes together, that kind of thing. One of the things that they do struggle with sometimes is how nonlinear behavior work can be, and how we measure progress so much differently. So with behavior work, it's not that we are measuring success necessarily by the behavior change. It is more nuanced than that. And yes, behavior is certainly one of our data points, but it's only one of our data points. And that's why suppressive methods can be so confusing, because if we're only using change of behavior, if that's our only data point into our progress in behavior work, then it can look like punishment is super effective because it does suppress the behavior quickly in a lot of cases. But that can't be our only metric. That's a super big problem and leads to some pretty severe fallout, as we know. So in behavior work, we're typically looking at things like, we're measuring our data points of, are the dog's baseline stress levels lowering? Are the dogs, is the intensity of their stress response to their triggers lessening? Is their resilience to stress increasing? Are they measurably bouncing back from stress events faster? Are they better able to engage in self-regulating behaviors that do serve them on their own? Is the level of support that they need in those scenarios shifting? Ideally so that the human has to be less hypervigilant, do less management, which is not to say there's anything wrong with co-regulation, but are we empowering the dog in that way? And our data points include behavior. Behavior is part of it, and also part of it is making sure that we are not manipulating or coercing the behavior, even by something as simple as cueing it. And we're looking at the behavior in those moments, certainly, but we're also looking at the dog's day-to-day behavior. As stress levels are coming down, we should see increased curiosity, better problem solving, better learned industriousness. We should see shifts in social behaviors. We might see that the dog is playing again more than they used to. We might even see things that if we were only looking at the behavior through this narrow lens, we see as negative, like all of a sudden the dog is blowing off their recall. But if we look deeper, it's because, oh my God, they're not terrified anymore. They're not so scared that they have to stay right next to their person. They're exploring. And so, yeah, we have to brush up our recall, but like, what a win. And so, we're looking at like their appetite. Are they eating regularly? Is their quality of sleep shifting? Is their quantity of sleep shifting? And so when I say, behavior is one measurement, it's also not just the behavior in the moment. It is certainly, did my dog lunge on leash, or did they turn away and use sniffing to calm themselves down? But it's also all of these other pieces, as well as body language and just all of these other data points. There are so many different data points that we need to take in to see if we're seeing that lowered stress response, increased resilience, increased ability to self-regulate. And if we're seeing a shift in those stress responses, in those triggering moments, are we seeing a decrease in the intensity, the frequency, and the duration? Okay, so that was a bit of a rabbit hole. But so in behavior work, we're measuring success differently than we might in operant learning. And it's going to be a bit less linear. And there's a number of reasons for that, but in short, because behavior is complex. And so we might see, we might need to slow down or even take a break, or we might see what looks like some regression in response to like the dog being sick or having a pain flare, depending on how effective our management can be, or if there are some no choice stress things that we have to do. All of these things can impact our road forward. And so while overall we are hopefully trending up in a very zoomed out way, there is a lot of nonlinear progress on the journey. And it is not a short journey. It's not a sprint. It is a marathon, right? So a lot of times with operant conditioning, again, linear, it can be very short, right? Depending, of course, on what your goals are. But there are a whole bunch of really observable, easy to notice, tangible progress markers in operant conditioning along the way, where the progress markers that I've just described, if our bar is like this, or our familiarity is with this like very objective, very tangible visual progress, like my dog can sit in this context and now he can sit in this context and now he can sit in this context. Behavior work can feel really bad if you're trying to measure it by that stick. And also if you are not considering the sustainability and the emotional bandwidth that you will need as the human to go on this journey in the long term. And so I think it's really important in behavior work that we also have this scaffolding of goals. So if I go into my behavior journey saying, I hope my goal is for my dog to be able to walk in the neighborhood, without reacting. In some cases, especially for dogs who struggle with dysregulation, neighborhood walks may not even be something. We may have to really reshift that end goal, because neighborhood walks might never be something that this dog is going to enjoy and benefit from. Or it may be something that may always be one of our hardest spaces that requires the most management, which doesn't mean that we can't see big improvement in how well the dog can self-regulate, how intense the reactions are, how often they are, what is triggering to the dog's resilience to those stresses. Like, we can impact all of that, but it may be that neighborhood walks are, again, potentially off the table, where like that may not be realistic for this dog, or that might be like like one of the big, like that's going to be a huge thing when it happens. And so we can make huge progress before we actually get to that tangible goal. But if that's what we're keeping our eye on, then we're not going to feel all of this other progress underneath. And I think that can really impact our ability to move forward and to feel like our work is effective. Because if the work is effective, but we're not able to recognize that shift because our eyes are set on something that's, the end goal, the most challenging thing, then we can miss a lot of the joy and a lot of the pride and the sense within ourselves that we are having an impact, which is vital in being able to do that longer term journey of supporting a dysregulated dog, and many cases of behavior therapy. And again, I just said all of that through the lens of someone who works with dysregulation. I also work with aggression with no dysregulation, but most of my clients are dysregulated with aggressive behavior sometimes. I don't as often work cases where dogs aren't dysregulated but are showing aggressive behavior, although I do that as well. And so a lot of this is through that lens. Dysregulation definitely adds a component that we may not see as strongly or as much in behavior cases with dogs who are not dysregulated.